Hey, how you doing today? This is the Circuit Rider. I hope your journey is going well, and I thank you for dropping in on I'm Just Wondering, the program about my thoughts and my musings, I guess, on the events of our day, things that affect us, things that are in the news almost nightly, uh, things that it seems like in our society today we're we're moving at unbelievable change at breakneck speed, and we're going to look at something today. My thoughts on genetic engineering, more specifically, gene editing and gene therapy, because it is in the news today, and it's in the news because of biometrics and with AI coming to the predominant form of information and surveillance. We're looking at the medical world more and more wanting to, I use the word invade our bodies with devices, both implanted or wearable, that will send them information through the wireless universe we have. So you and I are going to be on Wi-Fi as far as the medical community is concerned. And time will not allow, because of the brevity of these programs, for me to, I'm going to cram as much as I can in today. And some of it is background information and trying to help us understand what gene editing is and gene therapy is. Because the human body is a universe, just as vast as outer space, and it is a complicated universe. And research scientists, doctors, and those who practice different specialty fields, chemists, biologists, botanists, different different fields, will readily admit that they know very little about the human body, but what they do know is amazing. We just went through a pandemic whereby COVID-19 and the SARS virus infected the world and killed far too many people. And in record time, because the FDA, I think, and the National Institute of Health and the Center for Disease Control expedited some of the process to where they came up with a vaccine. And this wasn't something that was developed overnight. Gene therapy and the study of genetics has been going on since the middle to late 1800s. In the late 1800s, and around 1909, really, a botanist, a Danish botanist, and also a geneticist named Wilhelm Johansen named that, came up with the term gene, and it's used now as an accepted term throughout the medical universe. Speaking of the medical universe, the scientific community and the medical community itself does not agree on genetic engineering. And genetic engineering, I guess in the simplest terms we could try to find, simply means trying to re-engineer any flaws or faults in the human molecular system. And we'll come up with a few terms today. And by the way, I had more difficulty with this. I've been researching this for a couple of months, and I probably read 50 or more scientific research papers. And the problem is, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a scientist, I don't have a PhD in engineering. I'm a layperson who's trying to share with you, in the simplest terms, the boat that we're all in all these things that we discuss. But as I read research papers, they were written peer to peer, and so a scientist would use terminology that another scientist would readily understand because they've devoted their lives. And I have an admiration for their work ethic and the discipline that they have. I don't agree with genetic engineering, and we'll get into why as we go through this broadcast today, telecast today, podcast today, I guess you could say. But the scientists, the ones that have made remarkable breakthroughs and are recognized, and then all the thousands of scientists around the world that aren't recognized on a day-to-day basis, they've devoted their lives to understanding all these terminologies and the practice of knowing the human body and trying to work on discovering things. So kudos to them, and a pat on the back to those that are working so hard. But medicine itself has changed. You and I know it. We transitioned from, I guess the term would be a pathological response to medicine, whereby there was a disease and you tried to treat it. Now we're in an era, and you know it because the insurance companies and because of the medical, not so much we know about the medical research, but we know that physicians and medical staff that treat us are focusing on how to keep us well. And so there's much more emphasis on studying the human body and finding out why it gets sick than there ever has been before, in my opinion. Now, gene therapy, gene editing, and genetic engineering is a specific area of research. And when you read those research papers, you and I just scratch our head. I don't have any claim to authority about the thing I'm talking about today, and probably in a few videos to follow, because I don't know if I can cram all this information into one segment that's going to be 15 to 18 minutes long. If you want to look at as simplified a version as you can, Google www.1000sciencefairprojects.com. And that's a website that's geared toward teaching school-age children and probably at the high school or junior high school level. But it does put into as simple terms as possible what's happening. Now, when you and I talk about genetic engineering and what a person who spent their career and lifetime sharing with other peers, then we come up with all kinds of terms. And to put it in the simplest terms as we can, they figured out a way back in 2012, two doctors working in unison. One, a French research scientist named Emmanuel Charpentier, and an American named Jennifer Doudna, I believe is the way you pronounce it. 2012 won the Nobel Prize for a process called CRISPR, C-R-I-S-P-R, Cas9, C-A-S-9. They discovered that the human body, in fighting viruses and things that attacked human cells, had a defense system. And that defense system had to do with attacking the virus once it invaded the cell, and once it got in, tried to make its way into the DNA to where it could try to cause the DNA to transcribe and transport the virus to all the cell, the unique cells that were needed, that the virus needed to make it sick. These two ladies discovered this process of looking at how the molecules and genes and RNA and worked to fight a virus. And they found out that the body had a defense system whereby they would attack the virus and cut it into small pieces. And there's technical terms for this, but I'm not going to try to go down that road. You and I both would just end up confused on this if I started trying to name all these things. But they figured out a way to take the body's immune system and attack the virus cells, snip them up into smaller segments, smaller molecules, incorporate this into something that the body's health system could then use as a defense against viruses. And it's an amazing work, and they did an amazing job. But as we're at the crossroads of trying to keep everybody well, and I'll talk about what I perceive to be the motivation behind some of that in a bit. But we've got telehealth today, and the medical world more and more is going toward telehealth. I get calls from that my insurance company pays for from people who want to see how I'm doing and if there are any issues. I get home visits from paid for by my insurance company by licensed medical doctors who want to check my blood pressure and everything else. And until Biometrics comes along, there's a human being that has to do this. But if they wire us up enough and implant enough devices in our heart, brain, different places, wherever they got to get the information, then a lot of this will be done by AI-assisted computers in the future if they get their way. And this crossroads is significant, I think, not only from a biological perspective, but I think from a spiritual perspective, because some of that group in the scientific community, and not all of them, but some are futurist, and some believe in what we call eugenics. It's been around for a long time, and I'm not here to talk about conspiracy theories. I won't address too many of those today, other than just to make you aware of them. But I'm not going to get on my soapbox or bloody pulpit and pound it and talk about what all is wrong with it. I'll summarize it in what the Scripture says is wrong with it at the end of this program, because it is a spiritual issue as well as an emotional, psychological, and physiological issue. But there are some that believe that as we get better and better at eradicating some of these diseases, quote, for the good of humankind, end quote, that we will extend our life cycle and people may live to be hundreds of years old. Some believe in transhumanism. I did a program on that not long ago, that we will eventually, with the aid of information and science and computers, will eventually evolve into part human and part machine, and we'll be able to know all and solve all and live in this life forever without God. I don't think that that's a reality, but I think that there's a few that, and they are powerful and they are in places of authority, but they may be able to move the needle a little bit, but I don't think they'll get it down the road, because I believe that there's a God in heaven, and He loves us, and He has our best interest in mind. And I think at the end of the day, most of the research that's being done today, and not on purpose, I'm not blaming the motivation of the scientists and the researchers, but I'm saying that it's going to benefit the elite more than anybody. And the masses are going to be either left behind or dealt with in some other way that we'll touch on in a bit. So we're already 15 minutes into the program, and I haven't gotten to the real meat of what I'm talking about, so there's no doubt we'll have to do another one. But I'll touch on the highlights today as we begin to wind this segment of the program down. The Human Genome Project started in 1990, and for the most part didn't conclude, but its findings wrapped up in 2003. Dr. Francis Collins was heading up from the National Institute of Health at that time, was heading it up, and headed up this project with the aid of many different researchers. And they mapped out the human gene, and they came to the conclusion that there were 3 billion letters, what they call letters because they identify some of the molecular structure in 4 to 5 different letters, and that these 3 billion letters were on that chromosome, the chromosomal ladder, and made up the whole DNA, the human DNA, called the genome. And that we don't have to get time to go into all the, but the chromosomal structure is made up of 2 sides, the female and the male side. So here we are. We just touched the hem of what's going on. Now, as they do genetic engineering, there are issues with it. The CRISPR-Cas9 had issues in the beginning, and it still had issues with something called off-target, where when they send this modified RNA into the cell structure, and eventually, in some cases, depending on the disease, it would have to invade itself. It would have to invade, thousands of cells and millions of molecular parts in the human body to make the changes. But as it did, it may cut into places, because that's what it does. Cuts into the chromosome, cuts into the group, and tries to put something in there that would eliminate the fault or the structure. If a person has a certain disease and it's hereditary, if they want to eliminate that gene that's the cause of the hereditary problem, then they've got to make a cut. They've got to invade that area, and then they've got to replace it with something they've manufactured from the human molecular structure itself to replace it. And then they've got to hope that the DNA knows how to repair that cut and knows how to ingest that information and translate it to the rest of the structure. That's a pretty big order, and there are some mistakes that do get made if it's cut in the wrong place. Some was called, there's 3 or 4 issues with off target. We can't get into that today, but it's mutations, and some of those mutations would cause cancer. Sometimes they kill the cell or the cell group, and that becomes a problem. And there are a few other things that can go on that we'll talk about in a future series. So we got process problems. What happens when they use this technique, and things that can go wrong. Part of the problem is that it doesn't always work. We've seen anywhere from an efficiency of 15% to 60%, depending on what they're attacking. We got ethical problems, and I can't even get into that today, but we're going to talk about eugenics in a future, very near future podcast. And what eugenics is, and basically it's making designer babies. We're going to make a baby without flaws, and we're going to advance the humankind and make us all healthier and well, and we'll live on and on and on. Then there are biblical problems, and I'm going to discuss a little bit of those biblical problems. In Psalms 139, verse 13, the psalmist said, "Thou hast possessed my reins, thou hast covered me in my mother's womb," and I'm quoting the King James Version because I love that version, and I think it speaks to what's going on. He said in verse 14, I will praise thee, for I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. And in verse 16 he said, thine eyes did see my substance, yet being unperfect, and in thy book are all my members were written, which in thy countenance were fashioned, when as yet there were none of them. Psalmist David saying, in terms of today's language, you knew me before I was formed in my mother's womb. And that word substance in the Old Testament, Psalms 139, verse 16, when I looked up in Strong's Concordance, which was written in 1870, and it's basically trying to give a modern interpretation of the Hebrew, the Greek, or the Aramaic, depending on what part of the Bible it's looking at. When I looked up that word substance, it basically was translated as embryo. That blew me away. It's astounding that in 1870, the writer of the Strong's Concordance, looking at the Hebrew word in its original, the closest it could come was that embryo, that beginning, that unformed substance. In its minutest form, God was there overseeing the continuance, basically meaning that he saw the life process and that all his members were written in God's book. So one of the things I'm worried about is that genetic engineering is playing God, and some of their proponents and researchers have readily admitted, yes, we're playing God a little bit. And some of them are bold about it and saying we don't need a God anymore. Well, we do need a God. He's the one who formed us, designed us, and I believe that in every person who's born, God is active, because the human DNA, the genome, the complete DNA, the 3 billion cells, and the way that they've mapped it out, that the sequential order of those 4 letters that we'll talk about in another program, variations of that order and the way that the human body is made up, give us our inherent traits, the things that are inherited from our parents. And are your eyes blue? Are they brown? Are they black? Is your hair black or brown or blonde? Our skin color, our whole ethnic makeup, and all of our individual makeup and traits, we'll go into that next session, are designed by God, and he's left his footprint, in my mind, by scientists looking at these traits and how they impact. And science itself says that every person is unique and individual because of those traits. How tall I am, how short I am, what size I am, and so many other particular traits. There's a God in heaven. He loves us. He's designed us. And in my opinion, we don't need to mess with what God did. I got to leave you today. It's already 25 minutes into the program, and it's getting too long. But I'll say to you that the body is a vast universe. God created it. God oversees it. And God loves us. And he's got a unique, special purpose for each and every one of us. That's why he designed us. I pray that you'd find that God and that you'd draw near to him and that he could be your God today. God bless you and have a great day.